All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. My name is David Estrin. I am the founder and CEO of Together We Remember, a movement to empower the next generation of leaders to turn remembrance into action so that we can make never again a reality in our lifetimes and end identity-based violence and genocide once and for all. I'm honored to join you this evening in honor of Native American Heritage Month. Our goal this evening is to spark an intergenerational conversation about how we can transform a culture of denial, appropriation, and injustice into one of truth, restoration, and healing that will enable all of us to thrive in the sacred land we share and call home. And speaking of sacred land that we share and call home, we wanted to begin this evening's program with land acknowledgements, which is a best practice that we've begun to incorporate here at Together We Remember, and other social justice organizations around the world have as well. All of you have the ability to use the chat feature this evening. We encourage you to go to the URL that you see on the screen, native-land.ca, type in your address and check out the native land that you currently are on, and share in the chat your acknowledgement. In my case, I'm coming to you from the land of the Wampanoag, Massachusetts, Nipmuc, Pawtucket, and land of other Indigenous peoples, otherwise known as Boston, Massachusetts. So go ahead and share in the chat where you are coming from this evening. Would much appreciate that and allow us all to participate in this evening's program. If you have questions at any point for our speakers and panelists this evening, I welcome you to use the Q&A feature. Our panelists will be able to take a look at that, or you can share your questions in the chat as well. I would also love to thank this evening's co-hosts, our partners at STAND, the student-led movement to end mass atrocities, as well as the Light Education Initiative, which uses an incredible approach, an incentive-based approach to Holocaust, genocide, and human rights teaching and education. Light stands for Leadership in Genocide and Human Rights Teaching. It will be coming to classrooms all across the United States and around the world soon enough. And also, I'd like to thank members of the TWR Coalition, which are Holocaust, Genocide, and Human Rights museums all around the world that are collaborating on the Together Remember movement, as well as the TWR Youth Action Network, a newly launched initiative to turn remembrance into action in our communities, in our schools, and on social media. Without further ado, I'd love to pass the mic over to Jordyn, one of our panelists this evening, for a moment of silence. And she'll be providing a little bit of context about that. So over to you, Jordyn.
Hi, everyone. My name's Jordyn. It's nice to, see everyone here. Just before we begin this event, we would like to ask our members of the community and our allies just to take a moment of silence to honor the lives of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls whose lives who have been cut short by violence, and those who have been affected by COVID-19, as well as those who are still living with the pain and carrying on that pain. Please take a moment to send prayer, thoughts, love, honor, and respect in any way that fits best to you, and join us in a moment of silence. Thank you. All right, Ishii, passing it on to you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ishii Loho, and I am so thankful for everyone being here today. I am currently a senior at Terre Haute South Vigo High School in Terre Haute, Indiana, and I work with STAND as a member of their managing committee. And with TWR, I'm a founding member of the Youth Action Network and a part of the fellowship program. So firstly, I'd like to introduce our panelists for this evening, coming from a variety of Indigenous communities. Our first panelist is Angela Noah, who is the 2020-2021 Miss Indian University of Oregon, where she is currently a sophomore studying public policy, urban planning, and nonprofit management. She is a White Mountain Apache and Oklahoma Choctaw, and a youth leader with the United National Indian Tribal Youth. Our second panelist tonight is Brian Barlow, who is a citizen of the Cherokee Nation and is from Tahlequah, Oklahoma. He is a graduate of George Washington University in DC, where he studied public policy, and he currently serves as the academic intervention specialist in the Native American Support Center at Northeastern State University. Our third panelist for tonight is Jordyn Galvan. She's a junior at Texas State University, where she is studying political science and international relations. She is the communications and co-policy lead for STAND, the student-led movement to end mass atrocities. And she is also a advocate of the Mescalero and Apache tribe. Our fourth and final panelist is Skye Wildcat, and she is from the Cherokee and Muscogee Creek, and she resides in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. She is a 2017 and 2019 graduate from the Northeastern State University with a Bachelor's in Arts in Psychology and Geography and a Master's in Science in Higher Education Leadership. And she continues to work with NSU as the Student Services Coordinator and for the Center of Tribal Studies. She is also continuing her education as a doctoral student at the University of Arkansas's Higher Education program. So I thank you all for joining us today to share your powerful stories. And I think we can go ahead and begin our panel discussion. So I guess the first question I'd like to pose to Jordyn, we can start with her. What is your origin story? And we would just like to know in a few minutes, what has brought you to this moment and what is the advocacy work that you do for your community?
Thank you. I also just want to say, I'm so glad to be here, and I'm so glad to see so many faces. It's a really important issue, and it's something that, just everything that we talk about tonight, I just hold really close to my heart. So thank you all for being here. In terms of my origin story, I was always raised with my family really involved in our Indigenous ways and community. I think something that I'm really, I guess, gifted and blessed to have is just, every single day, every single thing that we do, it's always been taught in our own ways. Everything from the foods that we make, the things that we do, the things that we talk about, the, things that we do together as a family, they've all been rooted in our teachings and whatnot. And I promise you, every single chance my grandpa can have a chance to teach you something, he'll take it. So, that's definitely where a lot of, I guess, my direct involvement has been from. And in terms of advocacy, when you grow up, or when I grew up, every single day you listen to the stories of the people who are around you. You listen to the stories of your family members. You listen to the stories of your community members. Anybody and everybody wants to tell their story. And in those stories, you hear those common things, the common things that we experience that we absolutely love and that have been, really beneficial to our lives, but also the things that we have faced and the obstacles that we go through. And so once you start hearing about them, you hear about all of the different things that connect and the ways that each person goes through something, but it's similar. And so in hearing those things and caring so much about the people that I hear those stories from, I had no choice. It was like a fire in me to stand up and to say something and to speak out and to, just do anything I can to give back to the community that brought so much for me. I live in an urban setting, so that's a little bit of a different situation than a lot of people in my community go through, because it's really strange, and it's something that I'm sure Brian and Skye and Angela and everybody in this community can relate to, is that you're walking a little bit of a line between two worlds, because on one hand, you're really in touch with your ways and your teachings and whatnot, and then on the other hand, you're trying to advocate and stand out and speak and be involved in a different community that's very different from yours. But I think that the thing that really brought me to advocacy specifically is that through education and through knowledge and conversation, we can spark change, and we can bring a lot of assistance and a lot of care and just empathy and love to the world that isn't there all the time. And so in that moment and in those experiences, I personally found myself, really proud of my heritage and making sure that other people understand where I come from and where everyone in my community comes from, but also how to help, and how to get involved and how to stay connected and how to preserve and, move our, culture forward, but also just bring a lot of, good things to all people, not only for us in the current moment, but for our future. And so I can say, further along in my advocacy journey, actually, some people that I looked up to who are here today are Brian and Angela specifically. Like, I attended a conference for the Society of American Indian Government Employees, which is SAGE. And that was the first time I was able to kind of leave my hometown and work alongside with other Indigenous youth and talk about Indigenous issues and, hear all the stories about where we all come from and all of the different things that we go through or that we, excel at. And being able to, share those ideas and come together really sparked that switch from having the idea of, okay, I might be able to do something to I'm going to do something. And I am going to talk and I am going to share. And so I'm really excited for you all to hear about them as well, because they're people that I've always looked up to when I was young as well. So that would probably be the general idea of my origin story.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Jordyn. And I love that you have such a big connection with all the panelists here today. And I guess now we can go to Skye for you to share your origin story.
Sio Nagata, hello everybody. My name is Skye Wildcat. I originally come from Muscogee, Oklahoma, but I like to say that I grew up in the region. I graduated from Fort Gibson High School, and then now I've lived in Tahlequah since 2013. And so Tahlequah really feels like home to me. It's where my place is. It's where my community is. I feel really rooted in this land, particularly. So growing up, it felt like a combination of being like a rural native and a city native, because I was in the middle of Muscogee, but my dad always took me out with him to go and gather wood to make stickball sticks or bows, pick wild onions or other foods and medicinal items. And it would just be in the backyard all the time, like hearing the saw machine go off. Even to this day, when I hear something that sounds like a saw, like I get this flashback of being in my house or in my backyard while he's like making all these crafts. And so that really, it gave me an idea of who I am and who I was as a Cherokee person, but it never really instilled how significant it was that I had these traditions and that he was able to carry them and pass them on to me. And so in growing up in mostly predominantly white and non-native places, it wasn't until I got to Tahlequah and to NSU where I met other Native people, where I met Native teachers, where I met Native faculty, Native CEOs, all these people who were doing really great things. And just, even outside of Western education, I met other students like myself who had parents and grandparents that could speak their languages and grew up in a similar way that I did. And that was the first time that I could ever relate to somebody in the same way. And not having that sort of relationality had a huge impact on me and my self-esteem. I didn't want to be Native. I didn't know that it was a good thing to be Native. It felt like almost just this sort of like lingering thing that I was just like, okay, like I'm Native, but what about it? And so it wasn't until I met these people and developed these relations and saw like how much was possible to contribute to Indian country and how much was needed for Indian country, that I was like, okay, this is my life. This is who I am. And this is who I was set on this earth to be. And so now I've set forth my passion to make sure that other students and other Native youth have that same experience, that whenever they get to college or get to whatever goal they're setting, that they feel like they belong and that they can understand that they are allowed to indigenize spaces, that they can take up space in general, that they can speak out, that they can voice whatever opinions that they're having, because most of their lives they've probably been taught to either oppress them or not have them at all. So that's why I've chosen this path of higher education, and which is also really complicated. And being a doctoral student, I've learned a lot about the origins of higher education. I've learned how higher education is basically been born from the oppression of natives. You know, the first elite colleges like Harvard were established and were funded on the idea that natives would be converted to Christianity from their heathen ways. And to know that and to read those things and just to understand, like, why did no one ever tell me this? Why wasn't I ever taught this in school? Was really, really frustrating. And so it almost makes me, even now, like I still question myself. I'm like, am I doing the right thing? Is this something that I want to take part in? And I have to keep learning how to reverse those beings and that impact, and know that I can one day hopefully hold a center, hold a space that is Indigenous, that has cultural teachings, that has heavy language use, that has food sovereignty, a kitchen, daycare, family oriented, all of that I want to see for our people. And so that's where I've come from, and that's where I'm hoping to go.
That's so beautiful, and I'm so happy that you were able to share that with us. Sitting right next to you is Brian, so I guess we will go to him to share his origin story.
Siona God, Brian Brodalto, Talik Janelle, Tosco Su, Yaudatia, Gijalagi. Hello everyone, my name is Brian Barlow. I'm 26 years old. I'm from Talc, Oklahoma, and I'm Cherokee. I mean, growing up, my parents always made a point to tell us, or my dad did, you know, you're Cherokee, and that's something, you know, you need to know about yourself and invest in. But I pushed away a lot growing up. I didn't want to be Native. You know, I didn't look it, so I was able to not. And I pushed away a whole lot. My parents, you know, my dad really encouraged me to take language classes and things that would strengthen my identity, but I pushed away pretty hard. It wasn't until I was a sophomore in high school that a teacher really invested in me. And she encouraged me to apply for the youth council at the tribe. And that kind of like changed everything, because like Skye said, like it put me in a space that was like wholly Native when I was on the youth council, and I got to be around successful Native people who were like committed to making a difference in the community and understanding these principles of leadership within our community and how they're distinguished from contemporary leadership, that leadership really is about service, that it really is about putting people before you and serving people because it's what you want to do, not because you're, you know, anticipating a paycheck or some kind of reward. It's because it's what you're supposed to do. And in particular, I remember one of my mentors telling us a story that's called When G-Stu Found His Voice. And I'm not going to tell you the whole story, but in summary, it's, you know, G-Stu was very talkative, and he was always running his mouth, and G-Stu's the rabbit. And he was invited to the council meetings because the council knew because he talked so much, that he would carry their message far. And so he was going to be the messenger for the council. But G-Stu wouldn't stop talking, and he wouldn't stop being disruptive. So they put him outside the council house. And one by one, they take different parts of his body away so that he can stop making noise and will stop singing and just being disruptive, until it's just his little furry chest on the ground. And then they come out and they still hear G-Stu singing a song and using his voice. And they realize that song was coming from his heart. And so they give him his body parts back, and they invite him back into the council chamber, because they know that what he was sharing was so important that even with his head and his limbs taken off, it was still coming from his heart. And that was like a meaning. I really remember that. And it's that, you know, your voice is something that no one can take from you. And like being on the youth council, you know, I had lots of friends that never had a shot at being on the youth council, you know, that had jobs or had other obligations and would never have been able to do something like that. And it was a privilege for me to be able to do that, and to voice their concerns, to bring things back and be like, hey, this is what people are saying. Like, what can we do to help these people, or how can we connect these problems? And just knowing that our voices are sacred, that the words we use can heal and they can hurt. And I just feel like I learned a lot in that time. And it's a responsibility, but we do have to use our voices, because if we don't, they won't be heard. And so that's kind of how I found myself where I'm at. You know, I got a Gates scholarship out of high school that paid for me to go to any college in the country. And so I went to college and then continued to advocate, and found my way back home. And now I'm here and I'm joining you on this panel today.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you are able to share your voice and know that your voice is so powerful amongst all of us. And now we can go to our last panelist, Angela, to share her origin story.
Thank you, Dagote. Hello, my name is Angela Noah. I am White Mountain Apache and Oklahoma Choctaw. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a student at the University of Oregon. I study public policy, nonprofit management, and city planning. And yeah, a little bit about my origin story. I grew up on the Fort Apache Indian Reservation in Sibique, Arizona. I didn't really have a lot of role models to look up to. It was the idea of college was never talked about in our household. And so I left the reservation to attend a native boarding school to like graduate high school. That was a struggle for me. I actually ended up dropping out my sophomore year. Just a lot was going on in my life, and that was kind of a reality checkpoint for me, because I was the first in my family to graduate high school, to be on my way. And I was recognizing that there were a lot of barriers set up for me. And I wasn't the only one that had dropped out. There were a few other folks from my class who had dropped out of high school. And so this idea of elders always telling us to, you know, go get the white man's education, go learn the white man's language, but come back, remember your people, bring those resources back to us, bring those opportunities back to your people. And I feel like those are words that I have lived by. I always keep Native youth in mind, because I know what it was like for me growing up. And so I'm also first generation at U of O. Navigating higher education has been really tough. My second year, you know, with COVID has been a little interesting and wonky, not going how I expected, but this idea of resilience, this idea that one day we're going to be the new ancestors, so we have to act accordingly. And I just think about what that means for me. Something that I really love doing. I'm also the current reigning Miss Indian University of Oregon. However, my crown and my sash aren't present with me tonight because the bead maker has had just a really hard time with COVID. So I do hope to reintroduce the platform with my beaded crown and sash, but it hasn't stopped me from engaging with my Native community for showing up. And so one of the ways of advocacy that I learned, the word even activism, I feel didn't really resonate with me, because I felt that when my peers who were Native or the Native community were protesting or standing up for what we believed in, we all knew that our lives depended on it. And so I saw a lot of folks get recognized for it, but it feels even wrong to just be recognized or applauded, because I know that my existence, our existence depends on this kind of work. So I carry that a lot with me. And I really appreciate what Jordyn had said about walking this fine line. I feel like there are two different worlds that I'm always navigating in, and trying to carry my traditions while also taking up space within higher education. That's been a learning curve for sure. But if I can inspire one Native youth to just know that someone else had paved the way and did the hard work. And I always believe that we're holding space, even though it looks less in numbers. One, we're never alone because our ancestors are always present, but two, they're on their way. So meaning the future, like youth, future Native youth who are also on the way. I remember being that as a Native youth, and the United National Indian Tribal Youth gave me a huge platform to speak my truth, to learn how to take up spaces, to feel proud to be Native. That was something that I did not grow up with. And so I feel like the past few years has been me reconnecting with my roots and remembering my people. and like little things like offering prayer before my Zoom classes, because those things are carrying me through this time. And as Native people, we're very community oriented. So with COVID, I will say it's been a little tough, but you know, all of the impacts that reservations and tribal communities have gone through being under-resourced with COVID has just pushed me that more to speak up, to be brave, and to just find encouragement. So I'm really honored to be here with you all. And thank you so much for this opportunity. So that's a little bit about who I am and where I'm from.
Thank you guys so much for kind of sharing your origin story. I know it's like very, very personal and to the heart. So I just loved hearing all of that. And I'm sure all of our attendees did too. So I guess we will go to our second question now. So too often from our education system to academia to Hollywood and government, perceptions of the Indigenous community are shaped by those who are not Indigenous. Help us understand the community you represent in your own terms. And we will start with Jordyn.
Okay, hi, sorry. So this is something that's a huge conversation, not only with myself and like internally, as well as with others, but also within my family. And it's something that we talk about a lot. And it's that, you know, oftentimes we are poorly represented or not represented at all, specifically in like the mainstream, you know, public eye. And when we are, it's usually something that's not accurate to who we are. I'm sure you've all seen certain movies where it's always perceived and projected as, you know, natives on horses and that we like aren't civilized or something. And that's like so wrong. Like that is something that's like, to me, you know, or, you know, you just like, we're just a very misunderstood group of people. And that's because we haven't had the opportunity to share our story or to be heard. And a lot of natives right now are specifically standing up for that, as they should. And that's something I stand up for as well. But specifically just to talk about, you know, a few things that I think relate to our community is our values. And specifically, I can say that we honor everything that we do. We carry respect in everything that we do. There's prayer in everything we do. That's something that has been instilled with me my entire life, is that if you're not doing it out of love and out of respect, then you shouldn't be doing it. And that's in everything that you do, whether it's when you're learning something at school, when you're going to dance with your family, when you're going to eat at dinner. That's something that's strong within our community, is that you need to be respectful, you need to be honorable, you need to be doing it not only for yourself and for future people, but also for all of the people that you carry in your past and in your lineage. And also giving back. So our community is really big on giving back, which is why, you know, I really like how Angela, you know, said like, it's strange to call it activism in a sense, because it is truly just the way that we are. And it's something that we do, is that no matter what you do, no matter how you're doing it, you should be giving back to your people and giving forward to the people that are coming, like when we become older, right? And the younger people begin to rise. So that's something I would say. Another thing that I would like to just mention is the idea of a set image, right? So a lot of the times in representation, in, you know, movies, in media, in, you know, even representation of like positions in government and whatnot, we're expected to look a certain way. And that's really toxic, if I'm being honest here, because no Native person looks the same. We all come from different places. We all come from different backgrounds. We all have different genes. You know, it's the phrase of "I'm not your Pocahontas," which is a true statement. You know, when I was growing up as a young person, a lot of like I'm very fair-skinned for an Indigenous person, and so a lot of the time I was, you know, categorized in terms of my ethnicity. And, you know, you know, well, you don't look Native. Well, you don't sound Native. Well, you don't dress Native. Well, what does that mean? You know, we are who we are. It's the values and the traditions and the mindset and the lifestyle and the, you know, the stories that we carry, not the image. And so something I would like to say is that, you know, I think too often things represent us in ways that are, you know, how beauty standards are extreme, well, standards of how we are supposed to look as Native people are extreme. And it's no one's place to deny someone their identity as a Native individual simply based off of their skin color, their hair color, or the way that they look. If you're Native, and that's your story, that's your identity, and that's for you to own. So that's definitely something I would like to say. Another thing is that, I think that a lot of the times in representation in our community and whatnot, it's important to understand that trust needs to be built, not expected. And that's important to address on both sides. Some things are really sacred to our communities, and some things are kept within our family, kept within our generations, kept within just our community, the neighborhood, whatever it may be. And so those things, when we blend the two worlds together, it's important to respect and understand that, some things are just not allowed to be just easily shared. They're for us and they're from our ancestors. They've been passed on for years. And they're really important for us. They're something that we hold sacred to us. And it's not in any disrespect to anyone else. It's just the perseverance and the trust that we have to build in holding that to our own names. But that also goes in the other way, talking to other individuals, explaining Native culture and Native issues and, stories. We have to build a relationship with allies, with other communities, just as much as they have to build a relationship with us. So that's something I like to say, just because, a lot of the times I feel that in being in different settings and talking about Indigenous issues, it's kind of expected sometimes that, we're going to go super in depth about certain things. And that's just, it could be a little personal or just a little sacred. But otherwise, we need to do the same thing as well. So just blending those two worlds together and bringing trust and respect and empathy in everything that we do. So that's something that I think is really big within our community. And then finally, I would just say that, something about our community that needs to be represented in a better light is that our history is valid. It's extremely valid. It's extremely important to listen to our stories, to listen to the past, the present, and talk about the future. When you bring forth the conversation of the falsehood of American history, a lot of conversation gets brought up about erasing history. Well, it's not erasing history. It's bringing in the truth that hasn't ever been told, that hasn't ever been listened to. We can't ignore the fact that history books were written by those that oppressed the other people, right? And we are those people. And so we haven't had a chance to tell our story. And when we tell our story and we talk about things like specifically, just like a quick example, like Indigenous Peoples Day, right? Changing it from the term Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day, because we shouldn't be glorifying someone who brought on so much oppression and so much pain. And it's a day of mourning for a lot of our people. We're reclaiming that back for us, right? And in having that conversation with an individual, I've had the conversation of, well, we shouldn't be removing those statues. We shouldn't be removing those days. We shouldn't be changing the names because we can't erase history. They did bring forth civilization. They did bring forth science, right? And I understand that point of view. But if you agree that we shouldn't erase history, then you should be bringing forth our history to the table, our history to the conversation, our history to education and to books, because we experienced it, we lived it, and it's been so long that we haven't been able to express that side of our history, express that point of view. And it is valid. And if you agree that we shouldn't erase history, then we should be bringing this history entirely to the forefront. So that's something that I think is also important, is that listening to our stories, truly listening, not just hearing, but listening to the stories of Indigenous people and taking them for truth and implementing them in education and showing both the good sides and the bad sides of all of history and learning from it. That's something that should be better represented within our community. And that's something that I think our community holds very important to, our people as well. So, I think those are some things that have not been properly represented that are really true about our Indigenous community. But yeah.
Yeah, the idea of like building relationships going both ways is so powerful. And I think that's what we're trying to do today. And thank you so much for emphasizing that. I think we would all love to hear from Skye and Brian on how they feel about representation and how they would describe their communities in their own terms.
So I think Jordyn did a very good job at explaining the majority of what representation means for Indian country and natives everywhere. I mean, indigenous people everywhere. But as far as Cherokee Nation, I'm finding that representation is within our own communities. We have to start having youth be the core, being the voices. A lot of times I think we know that to honor elders, and we know never to speak over them. We know to listen to them, and we know to respect them. But we also have to know that the youth do have a place in the decisions that need to be made. And that goes not only for our tribal communities, but the communities everywhere. I think about lawmakers, and I think about people that have held these positions for years, and it's as if the communities often feel unheard. And so, for one example that I think of is native speaking or traditional language speaking teachers or first language speaking teachers. A lot of times, even though they're fluent in their language, they've spoken their language their whole life, they're not allowed to actually teach in a school setting because they don't have the correct certification or degree or whatever you want to call it. But really, they are the ones who do have the certification and the degree, and probably way more than any Western sort of system can teach somebody. And so just thinking about those kind of examples has really, I think, propelled a lot of the youth actions in our community. Even Brian and I and a few of our other friends have actually had to take stances against our own tribal community because of the ways that they lack in representing like not only youth, but tribes that are also on this land. And so I want to, if you look at some of the land acknowledgement, I think Tiffany Hardbarger put in there. So we are on Cherokee Nation land, but we're also on the United Kituwa Band land. And whenever we were removed from our homelands, we had at some point ended up removing other tribes from this land. So our land acknowledgement feels really complicated because not only are we settled here now, but at some point we pushed other tribes out. And so to think about that representation is that we have to acknowledge each other. It's not only looking at representation in Hollywood, but it's also from tribe to tribe. It's also from our relations ourselves. It's that lateral violence that a lot of times goes overlooked because we don't prioritize it as much as we prioritize the bigger movement of fighting the system, fighting this, the lawmakers, all of that. But I do think it needs to be acknowledged that we have to call each other out whenever we're not doing those respectful ways. And one of the biggest things to do right now is acknowledging anti-Blackness in our societies, in our communities, because that is very large and very vast, even in the Native community. And so that's something that I've really taken upon myself to try and unlearn some of those things that I didn't realize that I had learned, that somebody had taught me or that society had taught me. And so that representation not only comes from wanting those big positions, wanting that representation in Hollywood, but it's also from brother to brother, from sister to sister, from native to native, calling each other out and saying, hey, if you don't have people within your community that are speaking up for Black, Indigenous people of color or other ethnicities, then that's not the way to go. So that's just something that I want to also make space for, is that we also have to do a lot of work in our own communities.
Yeah, I would just kind of build on what Skye said. And I mean, growing up here in Tahlequah, like at least people know a Native. They might, might be in their family, might be related to some Native people, or at least have a friend. But leaving Cherokee County, leaving Northeast Oklahoma, I was completely blindsided that people just like didn't know Natives still existed. And like for me, that was just like, I was like, okay, well, this is where we're starting. We're starting from Peter Pan and teepees and existence. It's like, how do I even build on this? And I think that goes back to what Jordyn said, where our schools don't teach about us. Those history books, they use the past tense. They say Native people lived here. Native people made these things. It's always in the past tense, and it seems like Natives just stopped to exist around the 1900s. It's like that first half of that history book talked about us, and then we just disappear. and where you talk about in the past tense, and it's just like, okay, no, we're still here. And one of the first things I would ask people when I was, out was, how many tribes do you think are in the United States today? And people usually like 100, 200, maybe 300. There's 570 plus sovereign tribal nations in this country, and more that aren't even recognized by the federal government. And that comes with 200 plus different languages. And that goes back to what Jordyn was saying, the diversity of Indian country. That as an undergrad at my college, I was asked to share about Native American spirituality. And in my head, I was like, okay, well, I can share the Lord's Prayer in Cherokee. That's something I know. And they told me, we already have a Christian speaker. Thank you. We're going to look for somebody else. They invalidated the fact of me at the time being a Christian person and also a Native person, and that wasn't representative of Native spirituality. And me having to confront them and say, Native spirituality isn't real. There's 500 plus different tribes, and each tribe, each community is going to have their own ceremony, their own way of, giving back and honoring the creator, or however they believe. And I feel like people kind of turn this monolith of Native American culture, Native American spirituality, Native American people. But although there are like tons of amazing commonalities, and getting to go across Indian, I've had so much of a privilege to get to go to other places and meet Native people from different walks. And there's certainly commonalities, but there are a lot of differences. And I don't think people really take the time to distinguish that there's a lot of different kinds of Native people, and we have different beliefs and different languages. And there's honestly just so much to gain from learning from Indigenous people, that I think a lot of the problems we see in our world today can be solved with Indigenous knowledge. People are just completely blind to it. And so, from my standpoint, I think just our history books need to do a lot better job of telling our stories, like Jordyn said, and Hollywood needs to do a better job of having Native actors play Native roles and sharing those stories. And in government, I think Skye has a good point that we really have to look at our own governments too, and youth need to be engaged with our governments and better our own people. And I think that's what I got.
Thank you so much for your guys' answers. I think the idea that youth and education is now the core of many movements is so powerful and definitely resonates with me, like as a young person who's in school. So thank you so much for that. And so finally, we'd like to hear from Angela on this topic of representation.
Yes. So one of the things that I'm super passionate about is the outdoors. And having moved from the Southwest, where my tribal community is and where I was raised, and where my family is, I found myself in the Pacific Northwest, what is called Oregon, but known as Kalapuya territory. And I'm very fond of the Northwest because it's very beautiful. The Pacific Ocean, just my connection with the land and water. And just, I found myself on working with chainsaw crews, working with Native youth, establishing our own inclusive trail crews with conservation centers. It was the best time before committing to college. But I had this moment on the trail where I was wondering where my inspiration or why I was so drawn to the outdoors, where had that come from. And I remember the day that I learned how to pray, the day that I learned how to just check into, I guess, that meditation, a valid tool that I use to this day. And it was for my grandmother. She took me down to the river and I was crying. I can't remember what I was so upset about, but she asked me to go on a walk with her and tell her, she's like, let's talk. So I was like, okay. And I really trusted my grandma. I was like, I always told her everything. We just had that, that solid, that connection. I'm getting emotional because I miss her so much. But in Apache language, we say Shawaya, which means my grandma. So Shawaya took me down to the river and we were standing at the edge and I was just, telling her what was so upsetting me. And she said, are you done now? How do you feel after you told me? And I was like, I don't know, I still feel this heaviness. And so she said, I'm gonna teach you something. And this is what I want you to remember as you go off into the world. And she said, look at this river. and this river was flowing and it was running through our tribal community. And she said, that awful feeling that you have, give it to the river. And I was like, what? Like, being a little girl, like, give what to the river? But she's like, Angela, like, give your pain, that heaviness, that burden, give it to the river. And so in my head, I just kind of like told the river what I was stressed out about, what was making me cry, what I was unsure about. And she said, is it in the water? Is it in the river? Did you give it to the river? And I was like, yeah. And she's like, okay, it's right there. And she just pointed randomly into the stream. And I looked and she's like, watch it float away. It doesn't belong to you anymore. It's not yours, you know? And so whenever I feel stressed out or whenever I'm in nature, I always just pick up some dirt or soak in the sun, that's kind of my way of just honoring the land. And I feel like that's really just taught me with all my relations in general, whether that be with the land or my relatives, with coworkers, with professors, what have you. And that really guided me into just also whenever I felt heavy, I would go outside because I love the outdoors. Coming from a rural reservation, my mom used to always say, like, this is your backyard, and we could see like wild Mustang horses running around, people running up dirt roads to just get like a jog in. And it was like my reservation, and so having then moved to an urban space and going to college, it was really tough for me to feel that I had ownership of the land. But one way that I combat that is my friends and I, we will go to the coast, and I'll just like wade in the ocean. And my grandmother always taught me to, whatever space I was entering, to just, ask, let it know that you have good intentions and that you're not here to harm. So that's something that I always carry with me, my relation to land. And I love seeing just our cultures and our ceremonies interact with Mother Nature, all the things like our water protectors fighting against pipelines. It's all about just making sure that we're healing the community and healing our earth and healing our planet, and in the way that we're also healing ourselves too, that those relations are forming. So that's how I represent myself. That's something that's true to my heart as an Indigenous woman. Thank you.
That was so beautiful, and like the wisdom that you definitely shared would be something that I'm going to be taking with me. I'm sure everyone will take with them today. And I just thank you for sharing such an intimate moment with us. Just to be mindful of time, I think one phrase at the TWR community that we definitely focus on is never again. So in just 1 to 2 lines, could you guys please tell us what the phrase never again means to you or your community? I think that as a diverse community of identity-based violence survivors and their allies, we want to ask this question to ensure that we look out for each other and make never again a reality once and for all. So I would like to start with Jordyn.
Yeah, of course. Never again is a really strong statement, and it's something that, we shouldn't just look over. It's something that we should really embody. And I think the way that we can do that is through a few different ways. And I think one of the most primary ways is through education, just because I think that with a lack of understanding or a lack of education in certain issues and the history and the things that are going on currently, there's a lot of miscommunication. So we need to, educate the general public more about, where we come from, our history, and the things that we go through and the things that are present. But we also need to provide education, access, and opportunities for other people within our community as well. Because, a lot of the times it's really hard for us to get out there and to really speak our voices if we don't have that higher education, that higher degree. And that's really hard for a lot of Indigenous people to access. So increasing that access allows for Indigenous people to represent us and to join a lot of government positions and whatnot, to make sure that Indigenous perspectives are being respected and that we continue the never again mindset. I think also including Indigenous people in all conversations of all subjects, not just Indigenous issues, but specifically also Indigenous issues, is important. So whether it be climate issues, representation and advocacy, government, just any representation across the board, whether it be in the media, leadership, stories, anything like that. everything should have an Indigenous voice in it too. And, you know, in discussing and having an Indigenous representative speaking on behalf of their perspectives and what they go through, you know, we can remember and to tie back to our lineage and to our roots, and make sure that, you know, we are being heard in every decision and every single issue that's being discussed or made. And then just community. I think that, you know, we as an Indigenous community are really strong, and we come together to advocate for anything and to make sure that Never Again exists, but also the general community of just people, of just human beings, and understanding like the intersectionality of issues and bringing together, you know, everyone's background and everyone's perspective and coming together with all of our strengths and helping each other grow in our weaknesses, but also making sure that we lend that helping hand, that we hold each other's hand as we walk across the line and we come together and we discuss things together, and that we build a community of just peace and empathy and love and respect. Like I can just die on those words. Those are so important. And I just think that through building a community, through educating that community, and through teaching the needs of empathy, love, respect, treating others as you would treat, you know, those close to you, and finding a way to allow Indigenous representation to be on a larger scale is the way to really make Never Again happen, and learning from each other.
Thank you so much for that. And I'm going to pose that same question to Skye in 1 to 2 lines. What does Never Again mean to you?
Never Again to me means us getting up every day, putting on our beaded earrings, put on your ribbon skirt, moccasins, your normal clothes, whatever, and existing. As long as we exist, as long as we continue to be here, then that genocide and that cultural genocide and all of the historical trauma that has happened to us, it won't happen again. I fully believe that we are the generation that's going to reverse and put forth every single effort it takes to be the heart of who our tribe is, of who our community is, and just to be able to survive. We have the survival skills. We have everything it takes to make sure that we make it to tomorrow. And even if no one else stands with us, then we're enough to stand with each other.
I think Never Again is like a really powerful thing for anyone in Indian country. Like no matter what tribe you're talking to, I don't think there's a tribe out there that didn't experience some kind of removal, some kind of huge trauma in colonization. And for Cherokees, that looks like forced removal. That looks like most people, it's in your textbook, is the Trail of Tears. Me and Skye had the privilege to retrace that route on bikes in separate years, and it's something our tribe does. And we were taught that our ancestors didn't call it the Trail of Tears; they called it Digeji Elastana, which is the time when we were driven. And that's like a very traumatic chapter among traumatic chapters, but a particularly traumatic chapter in our history. But like Skye said, with that intergenerational trauma comes that intergenerational strength, and we don't forget. But we do remember that, and it can't happen again. And we do that each year. We retrace that trail so we won't forget that atrocity, and that we can't let that happen again. And I hope that other tribes, I hope that there's people from other tribes listening to this, and I hope that you might, in the essence of Never Again, start a trail of retracing that part of your tribe's history, to unpack it and to gain from your ancestors' strength, and to not forget, and to never again.
Yeah, I think the idea of intergenerational trauma is so powerful, and everything everyone has said so far is so powerful. And lastly, I think we'd love to hear from Angela in 1 to 2 lines. What does this phrase "never again" mean to you?
This phrase means to me, at one point it was unlawful to practice being Native, our culture and traditions, and to see the elections recently with voter suppression and the Native vote really rising in what we call Indian country. And so that is very inspiring to me. And I think that the phrase "never again" just helps me remember that I never want those who are coming behind me to ever feel that they need to apologize for being Native American, never again ever feel ashamed or stripped of our identity. And so I think that's what I think of when I hear the phrase "never again." Thank you.
Thank you, guys. It was just so powerful and definitely very, very insightful. And so I think our last just panel question before we go into Q&A and some other people speaking. So how might allies beyond Indigenous communities, such as myself, help advance your advocacy work and just very amplify your voices? And so we would love to hear any specific opportunities to take action and what you've seen, how we can help you in becoming effective allies. I think Jordyn, go ahead. Yeah.
Sure. Okay, so I'll keep my answer short because I know I talk a lot. But I would say, listening to youth, I really like something that David has said, that's something that Together We Remember holds true to them. He said it the other day in another call, is that, youth are not only the future, but they're the creators of history. And I think that's so true. And I think that's such a powerful statement. So listening to youth, and not only just listening to youth, but letting Indigenous voices speak for themselves. I think that, a lot of the times some people forget that, the best way to hear and the best way to advocate for issues is to let those people within that community speak for themselves. So allowing Indigenous people to have the first word or to have the first statement on whatever Indigenous issue it is, because, a lot of the times it's important just to make sure that that community gets to speak for themselves. And then educating yourself and others is really important. There are a trillion issues to study across the board. Across all of Indian country, all of the different tribes, we all face different things and we all have different individual experiences. But educating ourselves before we involve ourselves in the advocacy of a particular group is important. Understanding the history of the issue, the current status, asking questions and listening to people. And then I guess, just listening to those of our past too. Something that we hold really true in Indian country and Indian ways is that you have to listen to your elders, and because they have experienced things and we can grow in the future from what we've learned from the past. So honestly, the best way to involve yourself in Indigenous community and advocacy is to listen, to share, and to stand up actively with Indigenous people. If they say that, hey, we shouldn't call Columbus Day, and here's why, actively listening to the reason as to why, and then joining and standing up and speaking with them is important. Talking about how COVID is really heavily impacting Indigenous people, actively standing up and advocating for it and calling representatives, or, donating money, or, fundraising, or bringing forth PPE, whatever it may be, going with, just specifically trying to help in any way that you can, but in a way that's respectful. I think that's the way to go about it.
Yeah, I think that you definitely emphasize that youth is definitely going to be learning from the history, and they're going to be creating change. And the idea that we hold at TWR is definitely turning remembrance into action. And I think that came through in your words. So Skye and Brian, I'd love to hear from you on this topic. Any specific opportunities that we can take action and help uplift your communities?
So some of the specific things that immediately come to mind is advocating for mascot changes. There's mascots everywhere. One time I got on Facebook and I just typed in native mascots or Indian mascots. And I immediately was so frustrated because I saw all over the country, there were like thousands of posts, people arguing for those mascots who aren't native, who have no affiliation with native people, who don't even know the idea of why these mascots are wrong. Or even why they started in the first place. And so I think that's one of the biggest things that you all can do as far as representation. And additionally, in Cherokee storytelling, something that a very dear person to me, Janelle Ader, who's a storyteller, every time she finishes her story, she says, well, this is something that I have shared with you now, and this is something that you all have to go and share with other people, because now this is a story for you to share. All the stories that we have told today are like just waiting time bombs for you all to go and spread it, to sit at every table, wherever you are, and speak and share and acknowledge the voices of not only us, but Indigenous people all over the world. And lastly, I really, really want to encourage people to donate to Black trans community funds. They are currently Black trans people are some of the most, or they have the highest rates of deaths right now, suicide, homelessness, all of that. With everything that is going on in this country, I really highly advocate for donating to those funds, because they are the ones that are typically on the front lines fighting for rights of not only you and I, but themselves. And so I think that's something that's really on my mind right now. And I want to advocate for everybody who should do that.
I like just kind of working off what Skye said. Whatever table you're at, whatever job you're in, whatever office you're in, if you're at a table and you're discussing something, I want you to look around and say, is there a Native person here? Generally there's not going to be. And you have, that privilege, you're in that place, you're in that organization to pull those voices in. And so often people are not going to think about us. So I need you to think about us. I need you to use that position you're in to invite a Native person to that space. And in that same realm, I need you to fight for the water. I need you to fight for the land. I need you to care about the water that comes out of your faucet and realize that it doesn't just magically come out of your faucet, that it does come from a river or a stream like Angela was talking about. That water is sacred. And in the Cherokee, we know in Amalskediyu, it is important, it is sacred, and it's life. So I need you to invite Native people to the spaces you're in, and I need you to fight for the water like your life depends on it, because it probably does.
That was so powerful, and I know I will continue to fight and take the stories that you guys have shared today and continue to amplify your voices, and I hope everyone here will. Angela, love to hear what we can do to amplify the voices of your community and any specific opportunities to take action.
Yeah, so I've been this entire month been doing some decolonizing workshops about the narrative around Thanksgiving this week. And so, a lot of us may be with family members, may not be, but whether you're alone by yourself or with friends, family, I encourage you to look up the true narrative, the true facts about Thanksgiving, and how that's been very whitewashed and just completely left Native people out, specifically like the Wampanoag tribe. So to do your research, and I also want to echo of like donating to tribes. A lot of tribes are still seeking PPE, personal protective equipment, gloves and masks. The White Mountain Apache tribe, my tribe, any of the tribal nations that are represented here on this call, they're still seeking, and they're still under-resourced, and they need a lot of help. So if you could just Google like White Mountain Apache tribe, they have headquarters on where you can donate supplies. So helping the impact of COVID. And the second is this narrative of Thanksgiving, and being brave to have that conversation. And I'm also here to be that ally and support you in that work, because I know that can be a little intimidating, but it is healing work, it is active decolonization, and it's necessary. So I invite you all to help stand with us in what has been mentioned here, but also just understanding how Native people are often left out of these narratives, and just the reality of it now with COVID, and how that impact has just been really harmful and scary. So if you have that privilege and that opportunity, I invite you, because we need your help. Thank you.
Yeah, I know that this Thanksgiving, I will definitely be researching. I know everyone else is super interested in this narrative of Thanksgiving and what it actually means for Indigenous communities. So thank you so much for everyone emphasizing that. I'd like to pass it on to David to start and facilitate a little ally discussion. And yep.
Thank you, Ishii. You've done an incredible job leading this panel. To our panelists, a huge thank you as well. Don't go anywhere yet, because we will take some Q&A from the audience. If you hear a beeping in the background, I think that's an oven with some food going on, so apologies about that. But I want to welcome Nick and Cassidy right now to talk about their work as allies in working with Indigenous communities in the state of Pennsylvania. So Nick and Cassidy, if you could talk about your journeys of being allies in this moment, because I want folks who are listening in who are not Indigenous to sort of see themselves in this conversation, how they can take action as well. So go ahead, Nick.
Thanks, David. First, thanks to everybody. It's such an honor to share this virtual stage tonight with such inspiring leaders. I saw some comments about the number of notes people were taking out of this, and I'm a teacher and I'm taking just as many notes out of this tonight. My name's Nick Haberman. I teach the Holocaust at Shaler Area High School. It's a suburban district just north of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I'm also the founder and the director of the Light Education Initiative, an incentive-based approach designed to empower, to prepare, and to inspire students for leadership roles in Holocaust, genocide, and human rights education, remembrance, and advocacy, which is a word that I was really happy to hear a lot tonight. LIGHT is an acronym that stands for Leadership Through Innovation in Genocide and Human Rights Teaching, and it takes a three-tier approach. First, the implementation of LIGHT programming exactly like what you saw tonight. Second, the creation of LIGHT centers in schools, which are permanent spaces of remembrance and advocacy where we can plan this type of programming. And third, new LIGHT coordinator supplemental positions in school districts to grow and sustain the program. Currently, even during this trying time, LIGHT is continuing to thrive and to innovate, to build community, and to continue to create unique leadership opportunities and programs for students and community members of all ages. Where STEM has taught our young people to be incredibly innovative and creative, LIGHT acts as the yin to the yang of STEM, giving students a safe space and a brave space in schools where they can attempt to begin solving some of the problems surrounding human rights and genocide education, and also the recognition of things like Indigenous Peoples Day in Western Pennsylvanian schools and communities and in schools outside of Western Pennsylvania. Through LIGHT, no longer are humanities teachers the sage on the stage, but more like a coach. On the call tonight is one of my Shaler students who helped to plan the program you just watched, so she can speak more to the power of LIGHT, and together we remember and stand to inspire, to prepare, and to empower. Cassidy, would you like to take it from here and share a few thoughts?
Hi, everyone. I'm Cassidy Laffey. I'm a junior at Shaler Area High School, and I am the LIGHT president at my school, and I'm also a founder of Youth Action Network with Together We Remember. And it has just, first of all, I want to say thank you to everyone for coming tonight. It has been so inspiring to hear everyone's stories. But being a young activist in today's society has been so inspiring to see everyone's courage and everyone's strength, and that has in turn inspired me to be able to take a stand. I know in my school, I'm in a white bubble, and it wasn't until Mr. Haberman actually exposed me and removed my ignorance to these topics that I decided that this is not okay, that I found out what the word Indigenous meant in 10th grade. And so with that in mind, I wanted people to have the same realization that I did, but earlier on. It shouldn't be a realization. It should just be something that we are taught. And through LIGHT and Together We Remember and Stand, we'd be able to make this community of people who are so passionate about making a change and just amplifying the voices of those who can speak on these topics, because it is so important for everyone to be able to know and understand and support these communities, because it's been going on, the ignorance has been going for too long. And I think it's really important that we bring light to everything. So thank you all for coming today.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you so much, Cassidy. I've been so impressed with your activism work with the state of Pennsylvania and in Pittsburgh, getting Indigenous Peoples Day recognized. And we heard that come through as a key advocacy action. So thanks for sharing your stories. I want to pass it back off to Ishii to pose a couple of questions. We've gotten I think 15 or 20 questions, which shows we need to do this much more. We need much more time to do this, but I want to respect all of your times. You may be with family this evening. Thank you so much for coming and sticking with us this long, but please, Ishii, guide us through a couple of questions that our panelists could answer before we close out with some final action items and recommendations and send folks off for the evening.
Yep. So firstly, I think that one question that definitely was coming through in a lot of people's Q&A was, what message or lesson might I share with my friends and family tomorrow, as tomorrow is Thanksgiving, and I know a lot of families are going to be getting together. So what message do you have for them?
I can add, so part of the workshop that I presented, one of the ways that we just have a moment, because I understand, for me, Thanksgiving, it was the only time my family had off, the only from like jobs and work. It was the only time that like my cousins and my aunties gathered. And so we did eat, my mom would make some food. So we would have this big family dinner style, but we didn't really necessarily celebrate Thanksgiving. One of the things that always comes through is gratitude. And I think that as Native people, we are very thankful. That's part of being like wholeness and well-being. So tomorrow, if you just want to offer some time to just be in gratitude, not a lot of folks have that opportunity, those resources to come together as a family. One of the other things too is just acknowledging the food that you are eating, that you are about to put in your body. That's something that we do here with my family, and we give thanks to it as well. One time we went hunting for our own turkey in our own tribal lands. And when we shot a turkey for dinner, my uncle, he took a moment and we just like thanked the bird and like thanked Creator and just had this moment of just thanking life. And so I always think about that of like, what does like a decolonized like family get together look like? Because I understand that this is the only time that families can gather. At least it was for my relatives, because we worked so much and we were all spread out across the country. So I'm always appreciative of just family, community, and just honoring the food that you're about to put into your body, and maybe also decolonizing or trying traditional foods too. That's my recommendation. That's something that I've been encouraging folks to do with this talk of decolonizing Thanksgiving.
I think kind of just stemming off of that question, I think Angela, you kind of touched on it about like what Thanksgiving means to you and your family. So I'd like to pose that same question. What does Thanksgiving mean to you guys? And how is it that so much of the country is, quote, celebrating when this holiday often is it's a marker of the beginning of a series of genocides. So how do you cope with that?
I think Angela, family is super important in Native communities. Like family and community is everything. Like in Lakota people say all my relations. Other tribes have different ways of saying all my kin. And so I think gathering to eat food is that's one of the things we do the most. Is, if you can get some family together and some good food and have community, like that's a good thing. And I encourage any family, to get together and to hold each other close and hold each other sacred. And that's important. I think I would just encourage people just to separate Thanksgiving from Natives. I think I would just be like, that's a good opportunity to get together with your family and to eat good food and to, tell each other you love each other and that you're thankful for each other and that you're thankful for what you have. But I don't really think there needs to be, I don't know, that's just my opinion though. I don't think you really need to work history into it. I think it's a good time just to be thankful, personally.
Yeah, I really relate to that. A lot of times on Thanksgiving, I find myself at several of my friends' houses just because that's what we do. It's just a community thing. Of course, not this year for obvious reasons. And I would discourage everybody from gathering in large groups outside of your own family. But if it was up to me, I would just not even call it Thanksgiving. I would just say, okay, it's a day of feast. It's a day of fellowship. It's a day of gathering. Because just even saying the word Thanksgiving to me just acknowledges like this negative and this wrong history of what everybody thinks it stands for. And so like Native mascots, like other things, changing the name, I think would often probably make people dissociate or actually learn, hey, why are they wanting to change the name? And so of course that's just Skye's perfect world, but that's just me.
And I would also just like to say, I think the way that my family kind of celebrates Thanksgiving is that it's a time to be, thankful, but, to exactly what Brian said, just like completely like just uninvolved Indigenous people from Thanksgiving, because it should just be a time of like giving thanks. No longer continuing this narrative. I remember when I was really young in school, they used to try and like have like pilgrims and Indians, which is like really racist, to be honest. And it's like kind of crappy to do. It's disrespectful because it's continuing that narrative. But using this time to be thankful, to spend time with your family, obviously, distant with COVID and everything right now, but being grateful to those that are able to be there with you, and thanking the people that your life who might not no longer be there with you. And I think that's a huge part of Thanksgiving. And then also just another part of Thanksgiving, in my opinion, is thanking things that are not just people around you. So, thanking the air that you breathe, thanking the food that you eat, like Angela said, not taking things for advantage, but also like appreciating everything that you have and everything that you receive. When she talked about the river, like that's a huge thing for me and my community as well. It's like, go back outside, go back to your roots, connect to the things that make you who you are, and give gratitude and thanks. But don't continue the narrative of, we have to talk about the pilgrims and the Indians, or we have to talk about, the political issues between it, because those should be entirely removed from it, because it's not the true meaning of what it is. And to continue that kind of idea or that kind of mindset is continuing that narrative. So changing the way that we look at Thanksgiving and the holiday season is important.
I think that was super enlightening for me, and I think I never had really looked at kind of distancing the holiday from Indigenous communities, because for so long, like in my schooling at least, I've been taught that the holiday is for pilgrims and natives, and like I've seen that narrative kind of continue, and possibly that's something that we can change in the future. And so thank you so much for that. I think as time allows, I think we would have one more question. From your perspective, to what degree are atrocities that have been perpetrated against Indigenous people recognized in public spaces, and how important is that recognition to you? So anyone can chime in.
I think Indigenous Peoples Day is a big step. I think getting rid of the narrative of Columbus Day is really powerful, because it's such a false story. Columbus was no hero. He was actually a huge villain, and we need to fix that and straighten that out and honor Indigenous people. So I think that's a pretty good first step.
I think another step is for teachers to take their classroom and make it their own, which is obviously really hard whenever there are standards to meet, and there's specific tests that students have to take, and they have to teach the test, all those issues. But there are ways to bring in Native speakers, not just in November, not just in American Indian Heritage Month, but every month. Whenever you're talking about science, you can bring people in that have indigenized science, that can teach really cool things that are probably going to get your students way more engaged than the typical Western, this is the scientific method, type of way. And so I think really utilizing what Indigenous resources are already in your community, because I guarantee there probably are some, is a really good step to take. If you can put that into the minds of our kids, then you'll put it into the minds of the future.
I think another thing that needs to be addressed is that, these issues are not past issues. There are a lot of current ones as well. And I think specifically one like atrocity that isn't being, mentioned or, brought awareness about is missing murdered Indigenous women. Think about your mom, think about, your sister, your friend, someone, an amazing woman who has had an impactful, influence in your life, someone that you hold dear to you. And then imagine what it feels like to have them disappear or to no longer be here with you, and to not have any justice or anything brought to their name. We've gone too long where our sisters continue to be stolen and no one's saying anything about it. And that's something that needs to be addressed, and it's something that needs to be talked about and advocated for now, because it's still going on. And I've had to have those conversations with my family of, you have to be more careful as an Indigenous woman in the world, because you won't be brought to justice as you should be. And that's a very hard conversation to have. So not to bring it down to a really sore spot, but it's something that's important, and it's something that we need to actively stand up for and to reach out about and to bring awareness, and just having those conversations is super important, and actively standing up against it, because it's really important. It is something that not a lot of people are aware of and not a lot of people talk about. And it's a huge priority. You know, we should look at things both foreign scales and domestic scales, but you know, this is an issue that's going on here that people don't even know about. And it's a huge issue. So that's something that I would, you know, like to add to that.
I kind of want to echo Brian's mention of Christopher Columbus. On my school campus here at the University of Oregon, we had two statues called the Pioneer Mother and the Pioneer Father, and protesters have torn those down because what it did was it completely wiped out this narrative of Kalapuya people occupying the land and their descendants who are still alive to this day. Being said that the Pioneer Mother and the Pioneer Father had discovered Oregon and thus brought civilization. So those statues are actually down. And what I started to recognize is my first year of college, every time I saw those statues, I just felt so reminded of, oh yeah, this is not my space. And it just felt really like an ugly feeling. And then when I saw that those were down when I was biking, you know, by on campus, I just felt so proud, like, yeah, we did that. So recognizing that these glorifications and statues put up in cities and in campuses and public spaces are detrimental and impact Native Americans' mental health. And so we need to understand that correlation as well. So I'd love to see more advocacy around that. Thank you.
I want to add something really quick. To answer is like, no, I don't think a lot of times we're recognized or atrocities are recognized or Native people in general are recognized. And a good example was the presidential election turnout this year, where we saw Native people like really come out and vote, which is a big deal because like a lot of times that's a huge struggle in Native communities of like to participate in the colonial system or not. Like it hasn't helped us in the past, like they've done us wrong in the past, why should we participate? So it's a big deal to see Native people come out and vote like that. But we saw a CNN exit poll that broke down the people who voted in the country, and it said white, Black, Asian, something, Latino, and something else. And Native people, like our impact on the election was completely erased. You know, we saw tons of activists and people went out to go turn out that vote, and we got no recognition for it. And in classic fashion, Indian country took it in stride and laughed about it and said, oh yeah, we really are something else, you know. But that does hurt, like, you know, to have put all that effort forth and to participate in the system and then not see any kind of recognition. Like, I guess we're used to it not getting recognized, but it'd be nice to see that change. So if you haven't yet, I encourage you to look up something else, Native Americans, memes, because people really did take it on a roll. They said, you know, something else Heritage Month, and really contextualizing what it means to erase us from that exit poll. So I encourage you to educate yourself on that as well, and kind of how that plays into our invisibility in our society.
I'd love to extend a huge thank you to all of our panelists, Zoom snaps and claps to everyone. Ishii, thank you so much for facilitating an incredible panel and for being the spark that made this program happen. And Jordyn, for bringing together your colleagues across the country. And also to Nick and Cassidy for your incredible allyship work and all the work that you do. To our partners at STAND, the Light Education Initiative, the broader TWR family and our fellows, thank you. Before we close out, I wanted to share my screen really quickly with a couple of reminders and action items for folks. As far as next steps go, our mission, after all, is turning remembrance into action. And so a couple of things. One, seek out the advocacy opportunities that were offered by our speakers. I welcome you to apply to become a TWR Youth Action Fellow or to nominate a student in your community. Ishii is one of our fellows, and every month you're going to be seeing programs like this, as well as blog posts and workshops and various other initiatives that will all culminate in April during Genocide Awareness Month, when we unite communities that have been affected by identity-based violence all over the world to advocate together and amplify our voices. So if you know of a student who's awesome and ready to be part of that next generation of human rights advocates and stewards of collective memory, You'll know that, I feel like, so please go ahead and follow that URL, togetherremember.org/youth-action-fellowship. Follow our organizations on social media, Together We Remember, Stand Now, Light Education Initiative. And then finally, support our organizations this giving season, but especially Indigenous-led organizations. And as Skye mentioned as well, in solidarity with Black and trans-led organizations as well. We can't do this work without your support. We need it now more than ever, but our impact is become greater now more than ever as well. As a closing point, I'd just love to share that COVID-19 may be keeping us apart physically, but it's events like this and all the work that many of you out there are doing that are bringing us together virtually. And we cannot wait to be able to gather in person and to do this stuff properly out of the virtual cyberspace. But until then, wishing you all the best, and please be well, please be safe, and we hope to see you soon. Final reminder that those questions, there was a ton of questions. We're going to be compiling them and sharing answers in our blog soon after this. So to everyone out there, thank you so much, and have a good night. Bye.